In the memory specification, there are two explanations for forgetting. One is called interference theory, and that's the one we're going to look at here, and the other one is called retrieval failure. So in the exam, if it asks you to outline and evaluate one or more explanations of forgetting, then the ones you need to remember are interference theory and retrieval failure. So this particular one is on interference, and the spec says explanations for forgetting, proactive and retroactive interference. So when we're talking about interference theory and we're talking about forgetting, we're talking about forgetting in long-term memory only. And as you know, that once memories are stored in the long-term memory, they should be there forever. So why is it that sometimes we can't recall information? Why can't we remember things if somebody asks us? And this theory is saying that some forgetting takes place because of interference. So interference itself means that one memory will block or distort another memory, which means both of them can be distorted or forgotten. So interference between memories makes it harder for us to locate them, and this is experienced as forgetting. In the spec, it identifies proactive and retroactive interference. So proactive occurs when an older memory interferes with a newer one. So something that occurred in the past is interfering with your memory for something newer. And I quite often get this with students' names. So for example, I've had a lot of students called Lucy over the years, and so if I meet a new student called Lucy, then I can't remember their surname because the older Lucy has blocked the newer Lucy's name, her surname. Retroactive interference is when a newer memory interferes with an older memory. So something that occurred in the near past is interfering with your memory for something that happened in the more distant past. And I often get this when people get married. So if they change their name, then their new surname becomes the only one I can remember. It blocks and distorts their maiden name, the one they had before that. So examples of proactive and retroactive interference, I did just explain the ones with the names, but it could be that something that happened in an early book or film of Harry Potter is interfering with your memory about something that occurred in a later book or film. This is proactive interference, and that could apply to any box set or series of books or films. And retroactive interference, something that happened in a later book or film of Harry Potter, is interfering with your memory about something that occurred in an earlier book. So proactive interference can involve stereotypes and prejudices which can distort our memories. And what this means is that when we're talking about proactive interference, it could be a memory or it could be your information about the world, which you make sense of the world, is interfering with memories. So we call it like prejudices and stereotypes, and although we all know it's wrong to be discriminatory, we do have stereotypes. They help us make sense of the world, and it's not a good thing, but often it can be discriminatory. But this theory is saying that your ideas of what you think the world should be like can actually interfere with your memories for things that happen in the now, in the present. So to illustrate this, I want you to think about what a bank robbery would be like, including the people and the items involved. So pause the video and make a list of everything that you think would occur in a bank robbery. So I imagine that you've probably come back with ideas that are similar to mine and similar to many other people, which are things like men wearing balaclavas, and they've got a weapon, probably a gun, and they might be shouting things like "get down" or "give me the money." They might have a bag to put the money in. They might be a getaway driver, and that it's a violent and dangerous thing. So your ideas about how bank robbery should work, which is your pre-event information, may interfere with your memory if you ever experience a real bank robbery, because it will cause proactive interference. So your description will probably include all that stereotypical information, and we probably get that information from things like books and films and TV shows and stuff, because we haven't actually experienced it, but it tells us what we think might happen. So proactive interference means it includes our existing ideas, prejudices and stereotypes that can cause us to misinterpret and misremember events that we might witness. So proactive interference, just a tiny example here, but if you look at this picture, you can see there's a woman in the foreground and someone in the background. And depending on your own experiences and therefore your stereotypes, you will fill in the details of the hooded individual in the background. You will have ideas about whether it's a man or a woman, or their ethnicity or their intention. And you probably might be thinking that it's a man and that he's not going to mug her or something like that. We don't really know. It could just be a man waiting for the bus, thinking about his research paper, but we don't know. But our stereotypes will fill in information. It does look like a man there, and I've made the screen a bit brighter, but it could have been a woman. But our prejudices and stereotypes can distort our memories. And the last thing to say on this is that similarity will increase all interference. So the more similar the memories are, the more interference that will occur. So that can be proactive and retroactive. And there was a study done by McGough and MacDonald, who you don't need to know their names, but they wanted to study retroactive interference. So everybody learnt a list of words, and then they were split into different groups, and each different group then had to learn a different list of words. And the other list of words were synonyms. Now these are the words with the same meanings as the originals, so that those are really similar to the original words. And then you can see that the groups were antonyms, like opposite words or unrelated words, etc. And the last group was a control group, and they just rested. So sometimes in class I get people to learn this list of words with 100% accuracy and then give them another list to learn, so we can see the retroactive interference that occurs. So the findings were that all the participants who had an extra list did experience retroactive interference. They experienced forgetting, but it was the people who had the synonyms, the ones who had the similar material, who had the worst recall. And that shows us that interference is strongest when the memories are similar. You could pause the video here if you want and just do these research methods questions. So the evaluation for this, and remember, evaluation is saying we've got our theory of interference to explain forgetting, but what we want to do is say, is it true? Does it exist? Is it right? And so the evaluation will give you evidence for the theory and maybe limitations of the theory. So the first one is a strength, and it's the fact that there are thousands and thousands of laboratory experiments showing how both proactive and retroactive interference cause forgetting and distortion in long-term memory. And it's a strength because the more you can replicate experiments and find the same results, the higher the likelihood that the theory is valid, that interference does cause forgetting. And remember that laboratory experiments are often high in internal validity because they're well controlled and well designed. So in science, the more you replicate, the more robust the theory is, because you keep finding the same results. That indicates that it is interference that is causing the forgetting. The second evaluation point is research evidence specifically for retroactive interference, called the Broken Headlight Study. And participants were shown a film clip of a car accident and asked a series of filler questions. And there was one critical question about a broken headlight, but there wasn't actually a broken headlight in the film they saw. The control group were asked, did you see a broken headlight? And the experimental group were asked, did you see the broken headlight, which is a leading question, because saying the indicates there was one. They found that 7% of people said yes to in the control group, and 17% of people said yes in the experimental group, which is much higher, and indicates that retroactive interference occurred because the leading question distorted their original memory for what they had seen. So when you ask people leading questions, that is providing retroactive interference. Saying, did you see the broken headlight, is indicating that there was one, and that piece of information has distorted their memory for the original event, making them think there was a broken headlight. You could try that research methods question if you want to write 2 suitable filler questions for their questionnaire. More evidence for proactive interference, in particular about how stereotypes distort memories, is from the Black Man, White Man Razor study from 1947 in America. So unfortunately, discrimination does still occur across the world even though it shouldn't. And in the 1940s, racial discrimination was even stronger possibly than it is today. So participants were shown, American participants were shown this picture. So it's quite, obviously it's from the 40s, it's quite old. The man on the left is a white man, and he's holding in his hand a cutthroat razor, which was used as a weapon. And you can see that he's threatening the black man who's on the right with the razor. A week later, the participants were asked to come back to the laboratory and asked what they could remember. And they remembered that it was the black man threatening the white man. So this really demonstrates how their prejudices and stereotypes, their proactive interference, really distorted their memory from what they had seen later on. So your prejudices and stereotypes are old information. They're what you've kind of generated throughout your life, and they can act as a way to stop you remembering things correctly that you then witness in real time. And so this is clear evidence for proactive interference. Interference theory has a lack of external validity because most of the experiments that are done were laboratory experiments where you might learn a list of words, and that doesn't really explain forgetting in the real world. So you would have to think about that and think about how could you show interference in real world settings. And there is one experiment actually that does show real life studies of interference. So some rugby players were asked to remember and recall all of the last teams that they had played in a season. And what they found was that it didn't matter how long ago they had played, it could have been like weeks and weeks ago, what mattered was how many games they had played. So if someone played one game and then had an injury so didn't play for several weeks, they would have really good recall of the original game because there was nothing interfering with their memories of all of the different games they played. The people who played every single game were the ones who couldn't remember the teams because they kept experiencing retroactive interference or proactive interference, where memory of one team would block and distort another. So you could have a go at this 12 marker for AS psychology, or 16 marker if you're doing A level, outline and evaluate interference theory of forgetting. So you would start by just explaining what interference theory is, and then explain proactive interference with an example, and then explain retroactive interference with an example, and then very briefly explain the effects of similarity on interference. And then you would choose at least 3 evaluation points for AS level and possibly 4 or even 5 evaluation points for A level. And you could also have a go at this AO2, which means apply your knowledge exam question.